There are cases that never leave you. Cases that burrow into the minds of investigators, families, entire communities, and refuse to let go. Sarah Lynn Harmon's disappearance was one of those cases. For 35 years, her name hung in the air of Copper Ridge, Michigan, like morning fog that never quite burns away. People spoke of her in hushed tones at the general store, at church potlucks, at high school reunions where her empty chair remained a ghost in the room. And for 35 years the forest kept its secrets. Until now. October 14th, 1989. A Friday evening, the kind that arrives with a chill that seeps through your jacket and settles in your bones. Sarah Lynn Harmon, 17 years old, told her mother she was going for a walk before dinner. Nothing unusual about that. Sarah walked almost every day after school, usually along the Old Miners Trail, a path that wound through the dense pine and birch forests of Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula. She loved those woods. Her best friend, Jennifer Kowalski, said Sarah felt more at home among the trees than anywhere else. She wasn't running away from anything, Jennifer would tell police later, her voice cracking. She was just Sarah. She needed the quiet. The forest made sense to her in ways people didn't. Sarah left her house at 4:47 p.m. Her mother, Dorothy Harmon, remembered the exact time because she'd glanced at the kitchen clock when Sarah called out goodbye. Dorothy was making pot roast, Sarah's favorite. They'd planned to eat at 6. Sarah promised she'd be back by 5:30, plenty of time to wash up and help set the table. She never came home. By 6:15, Dorothy felt the first flutter of concern. By 6:45, that concern had hardened into something closer to fear. By 7:30, when full darkness had settled over Copper Ridge and the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, Dorothy called the police. Her husband, Robert, was already out driving the back roads with a flashlight, calling Sarah's name into the vast indifference of the forest night. The Copper Ridge Police Department, a small force of 8 officers serving a town of just over 2,000 people, responded immediately. Chief Harold Vickers, a man who'd known Sarah since she was born, organized search parties before the sun rose the next morning. By dawn on October 15th, nearly 80 volunteers were combing the Old Miners Trail and the surrounding forest. They brought dogs, flashlights, thermoses of coffee, and the kind of grim determination that comes when a child from your community goes missing. The search would continue for 11 days. What they found during those 11 days would haunt Copper Ridge for decades. The first discovery came on day 2. A volunteer named Marcus Webb, a local hunting guide who knew these woods better than his own backyard, found Sarah's denim jacket hanging from a low branch about 1.5 miles into the trail. Not thrown there, not torn, hanging. As if someone had carefully draped it over the branch, almost deliberately placed. It didn't make sense, Marcus told investigators, his weathered face creasing with confusion. The jacket was intact, no rips, no blood, nothing. Just hanging there like she'd taken it off because she was too warm, but it was 35 degrees that night. Why would she take off her jacket? The jacket was bagged as evidence. Lab analysis found nothing unusual, no foreign fibers, no signs of struggle, no biological evidence beyond Sarah's own DNA. Just a teenage girl's denim jacket, hung on a branch in the middle of nowhere. But there was something else near that jacket. Something that made Marcus Webb pause, his tracker's instincts bristling with unease. Footprints in the soft earth beside the trail. 2 sets. One clearly belonged to Sarah, her white canvas sneakers leaving distinctive tread marks. The other prints were larger, deeper, and strange. They looked almost human, Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. But not quite right. The spacing was off, too wide. And the depth, whatever made those prints, was heavy. Real heavy. Heavier than any man I know. The prints followed Sarah's for about 30 yards, then veered off the trail into denser forest. Search teams followed them as far as they could, but the tracks disappeared into rocky terrain where the ground gave up nothing. K9 units were brought in. The dogs picked up Sarah's scent easily enough, following it along the trail, past where the jacket was found, deeper into the forest. But then, about 2 miles in, the dogs did something that troubled their handlers. They stopped, all 3 of them simultaneously. They whined, circled, refused to go further. One dog, a German shepherd named Rex with 6 years of search and rescue experience, actually backed away, ears flat, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "I've never seen Rex act like that," his handler, Officer Dale Morrison, reported. "He's found lost hikers in blizzards, tracked suspects through swamps. Nothing rattles him. But that day in that spot he wouldn't go forward. It was like there was a wall there we couldn't see. That spot, a small clearing surrounded by ancient white pines, became a focus of the investigation. Crime scene technicians scoured every inch. They found Sarah's footprints entering the clearing. They found those other prints, the strange ones, circling the perimeter. And they found something else that made seasoned investigators pause and exchange uneasy glances. Scratches on the trees. 4 parallel marks, deep gouges in the bark of several pines surrounding the clearing. The marks were high, 8 to 10 feet off the ground. Too high for a person standing on the ground to make. The scratches were fresh, the wood beneath still pale and sticky with sap. Wildlife experts were consulted. Could it be a bear? Michigan had black bears, certainly, and they did mark trees. But these marks were different. Too deliberate, too uniform. And the spacing between the gouges suggested something with a larger paw, longer claws than any black bear on record. "It's unusual," admitted Dr. Helen Cortez, a wildlife biologist from Michigan State University who was brought in to examine the evidence. "The pattern is atypical for known species in this region. Black bears do mark territory, but not like this. These gouges are deeper, more forceful, and the height is concerning. A bear would have to rear up to its full extension, which they rarely do when marking. It's puzzling. Puzzling. That word would appear again and again in the case files. Puzzling footprints, puzzling scratches, puzzling behavior from experienced tracking dogs. And 3 days into the search, the most puzzling discovery of all, Sarah's journal. A volunteer named Christine Mallory found it on October 17th, resting on top of a moss-covered boulder 2 miles from where Sarah's jacket had been found. The boulder sat beside a small creek, the water running cold and clear over smooth stones. The journal was open, pages exposed to the elements but somehow barely damaged. Light rain had fallen the previous night, yet the pages were only slightly damp, as if something had sheltered them. Christine picked it up carefully, her hands trembling. She recognized it immediately. She'd seen Sarah carrying that journal everywhere, a leather-bound notebook with a compass rose embossed on the cover, a gift from her grandfather. Christine opened it fully and saw sketches, dozens of them. Trees, mostly. Ravens, the shoreline of Lake Superior. And on the final page, a drawing that made Christine's breath catch in her throat. A figure among the trees, tall, impossibly tall. The proportions were rough, sketchy, but the impression was clear. Something standing upright, partially obscured by pine trunks watching, just watching. And beneath the sketch in Sarah's careful handwriting, "I think it's watching me." Chief Vickers studied that journal for hours. He brought in handwriting analysts to confirm it was Sarah's writing. It was. He brought in psychologists to interpret the meaning. Was Sarah experiencing paranoia, hallucinations, fear of something real or imagined? "The drawing shows spatial awareness and detail," noted Dr. B. Richard Ames, a forensic psychologist. "She's depicting something she believes she saw. Whether that something was actually there, or a product of fear, isolation, or even an optical illusion caused by shadows and tree formations, we can't say. But Sarah believes she saw it, that's evident." The journal became both a clue and a riddle. What had Sarah seen, or thought she'd seen? The forest was full of shadows, especially at dusk. The mind could play tricks. A cluster of branches, a moss-covered stump, the way light filtered through dense canopy, all of it could create shapes that seemed alive, seemed aware. But that didn't explain the footprints, or the scratches, or the way the dogs had refused to continue. As the search entered its second week, the weather turned. Snow fell early that year, unusual even for the Upper Peninsula. By October 20th, 6 inches of fresh powder covered the forest floor, erasing whatever traces might have remained. The search teams worked through the cold, their numbers dwindling as hope faded. By October 24th, Chief Vickers made the hardest decision of his career. He called off the active search. Sarah Lynn Harmon was officially listed as missing, presumed lost to the wilderness. The years that followed were agony for the Harmon family. Dorothy never stopped hoping, never stopped waiting. Every time the phone rang, every time there was a knock at the door, her heart would leap. Maybe this time. Maybe today. Robert grew quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours in Sarah's room, surrounded by her things, as if proximity to her belongings could somehow bring her back. They offered rewards. They hired private investigators. They appeared on local news programs, holding up Sarah's photograph, begging for information. Nothing came. The case went cold, as so many do. Files were boxed and stored. The volunteers returned to their lives. The forest reclaimed the search trails, branches growing over the paths worn by desperate feet. Copper Ridge moved forward, but slowly, carrying Sarah's absence like a stone in its collective heart. Jennifer Kowalski graduated high school without her best friend. She left Copper Ridge for college, but the guilt followed her. "I should have gone with her that day," Jennifer would say years later, tears streaming down her face. "She asked me to walk with her. I said I had homework." Homework. God, if I'd just gone with her. But time has a way of revealing what darkness hides. In 2018, nearly 30 years after Sarah's disappearance, a team of environmental scientists arrived in the Keweenaw Peninsula to study forest regeneration in areas affected by historical copper mining. They were mapping old mine shafts, documenting wildlife corridors, taking soil samples. Standard work. Routine. Until one of them, a graduate student named Brian Kellerman, noticed something unusual near one of the abandoned mine entrances. Exposed bone. Brian, trained in archaeological protocols, knew immediately it was human. He marked the location, contacted authorities, and stepped back. The Michigan State Police were notified. A forensic team was dispatched. On a cold morning in November 2018, investigators carefully excavated the site. What they found confirmed every parent's worst nightmare. Skeletal remains, partially buried and scattered by decades of weather and animal activity. But enough remained for analysis. The bones showed signs of trauma, but whether that trauma occurred before or after death was impossible to determine after so many years. Clothing fragments were recovered, rotted and degraded, but still present. Denim, flannel, the remnants of white canvas sneakers. DNA analysis took months. The Harmon family, cautiously hopeful after so many years of silence, waited once again. Dorothy was 71 now, her hair white, her hands shaking as she answered the phone, when Chief Vickers' successor, Chief Amanda Torres, finally called with preliminary results. The remains were Sarah's. After 29 years, Sarah Lynn Harmon had been found, but finding her only opened new questions. The location where her remains were discovered was nearly 4 miles from where her journal had been found, deep in an area that had been searched multiple times in 1989. How had the search teams missed her? Why was she so far off the established trail? And what had happened in the hours between her last journal entry and her death? The case was officially reopened. Cold case detectives, armed with technologies that didn't exist in 1989, began re-examining every piece of evidence. The jacket, the journal, the photographs of those strange footprints, the marks on the trees. Everything was reviewed through a modern lens. And then came the breakthrough. In 2024, advances in DNA analysis technology allowed investigators to extract and analyze trace DNA from Sarah's clothing, specifically from her flannel shirt. The lab found something that had been missed in 1989 because the technology simply didn't exist yet. Foreign DNA, not human. Not from any animal definitively catalogued in forensic databases. "We ran it through every database we have access to," explained Dr. Sharon Way, the forensic geneticist who made the discovery. Canid, GenBank, everything. The sample shares some markers with known species, primarily large mammals like bears or wolves, but there are sequences that don't match. It's not that they're unknown exactly, it's that they're unexpected. Like finding genetic markers from animals that shouldn't be in this region, or combinations that seem anomalous. Anomalous. Another word that would haunt this case. Was it contamination? Cross-species DNA transfer from multiple animals? or something else? The scientific community remained cautiously skeptical, as scientists should be. But for the investigators working Sarah's case, it was a thread, however thin, to pull. They went back to the forest. Back to that clearing where the dogs had stopped. Soil samples were taken, analyzed for trace evidence that modern technology might detect. And there, buried under 35 years of leaf litter and earth, they found fibers. Synthetic fibers that didn't match anything Sarah was wearing. Fibers that, when analyzed, were traced to a type of outdoor tarp manufactured in the late 1980s. Someone else had been in that clearing, someone who'd left behind fragments of material. Someone who might have answers. The investigation took on new urgency. Detectives began re-interviewing anyone still alive who'd been involved in the original search. Marcus Webb, now 73, was shown enhanced photographs of the footprints he'd found. New analysis suggested they might not be footprints at all, but rather impressions made by something dragged across the ground. Could Sarah have been carried? Dragged? "I don't know anymore," Marcus admitted, his voice heavy with age and uncertainty. "Back then, I was sure of what I saw. But now, maybe my mind filled in details. Maybe I wanted to see something that made sense, even if that something was impossible." But then came the interview that changed everything. A man named Thomas Ridley, age 68. In 2024, he was living in a care facility in Marquette, suffering from early-stage dementia. But when cold case detective Laura Fenimore mentioned Sarah Harmon's name, something flickered in Thomas's eyes. Recognition, and something else. Guilt. "I saw them that night," Thomas whispered, his hands clutching the arms of his wheelchair. "I was hunting. Up past the old miners' trail. I shouldn't have been there, private land, but I knew the owner looked the other way. I saw her. The girl. She was running." Detective Fenimore leaned forward. "Running from what, Thomas?" Thomas's eyes grew distant. "I don't know. I couldn't see. It was getting dark, but she was scared. I could tell by the way she moved, like something was chasing her. I called out, asked if she needed help, but she didn't hear me, or didn't want to stop. She just kept running deeper into the forest, and then..." "Then what?" Thomas's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I heard it. Behind her. Heavy footsteps, breaking branches, and a sound. God, a sound I've never heard before or since. Low, rumbling, like thunder, but alive. I've hunted these woods for 50 years. I know every animal, every sound. That wasn't anything I recognized." "Did you see what was making the sound?" Thomas shook his head. I was afraid. I'm not proud of it, but I left. I went home. And when I heard the next day that a girl had gone missing, I couldn't. I couldn't admit I'd been there, hunting illegally. I couldn't admit I'd seen her and done nothing. For 35 years, Thomas Ridley had carried that secret. Now, finally, investigators had a witness. Imperfect, yes. His memory potentially compromised by age and guilt. But a witness nonetheless. Someone who'd seen Sarah's final moments. Someone who'd heard something in those woods that defied explanation. The pieces were coming together, slowly, painfully. But the picture they formed was far from complete. What really happened to Sarah Lynn Harmon on that October evening in 1989? Was her death a tragic accident, a young woman lost in the wilderness, overcome by the elements? Or was there something else in those woods, something that left footprints too large to be human, scratches too high to be natural, and DNA too strange to be explained? The forest still holds its secrets, but after 35 years, those secrets are finally beginning to whisper. Was Sarah running from something real, or from the shadows of her own fear? Thomas Ridley's confession opened a door that had been sealed for 35 years, but what lay beyond that door was darkness, ambiguity, and questions that multiplied faster than answers could be found. Detective Laura Fenimore, 42 years old, had worked cold cases for the Michigan State Police for nearly a decade. She'd seen her share of tragic endings, unsolved mysteries, and families destroyed by uncertainty. But Sarah Harmon's case felt different. There was something about it that unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was the journal entry. Maybe it was the strange DNA. Or maybe it was the look in Thomas Ridley's eyes when he described that sound in the forest. a sound that still haunted him after all these years. Laura wasn't one for supernatural explanations. She believed in evidence, in logic, in the slow, methodical work of piecing together timelines and motives. But she also believed in listening to that quiet voice in the back of her mind, the one that whispered when something didn't add up. And in Sarah's case, a lot didn't add up. The investigation in 2024 took on new dimensions. Laura assembled a small team: forensic anthropologist Dr. Marcus Chen, who specialized in analyzing skeletal trauma; wildlife tracker Devon Martinez, an Ojibwe guide who'd grown up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and knew the forests better than anyone; and technical analyst James Park, who could enhance decades-old photographs and extract data from degraded evidence that others might miss. They started with the timeline. Sarah left her house at 4:47 p.m. on October 14, 1989. Sunset that day was at 6:18 p.m. Thomas Ridley estimated he saw Sarah running through the forest around 5:45 p.m., though he admitted his sense of time might have been impaired by fear. That gave them roughly a 1-hour window. 1 hour between Sarah's departure and Thomas's sighting. 1 hour for something to go terribly wrong. "Let's walk it," Laura said, literally. "Let's retrace her steps." On a cold morning in March 2024, the team gathered at the Harmon house, still owned by Dorothy, who'd refused to sell despite the memories that saturated every room. Dorothy met them at the door, her face lined with decades of grief, but her eyes sharp, hopeful. She'd waited so long for answers. She could wait a little longer. Sarah always took the same route, Dorothy told them, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Down Maple Street, left on Forest Road, then the trailhead for Old Miners Trail. She knew it by heart. Sometimes she'd vary which fork she took once she got deeper in, but the start was always the same. The team followed that route. From the Harmon house to the trailhead was exactly 1.2 miles, a walk that took them 23 minutes at a casual pace. Sarah, young and healthy, probably walked it faster. 15 minutes, maybe less. That put her at the trailhead around 5 p.m., with roughly an hour of daylight remaining. The Old Miners Trail itself was still there, maintained now by the State Park Service, though sections had been rerouted over the years. Devon Martinez led them along what he'd determined was the original 1989 path, using historical maps and his own knowledge of the terrain. The forest had changed in 35 years, trees growing thicker, underbrush reclaiming cleared areas, but the bones of the landscape remained. They walked in silence, each of them imagining Sarah making this same journey, her journal tucked into her jacket pocket, her mind on whatever thoughts occupied a 17-year-old who preferred trees to people. The forest pressed in on both sides, dense and watchful. Even in daylight, even with 4 armed professionals, there was something about these woods that made Laura's skin prickle. "This is where the jacket was found," Devon said, stopping beside a large oak tree. The original tree where the jacket had hung was gone, claimed by storms or age, but Devon had marked the location using the 1989 crime scene photographs. Laura studied the area. The trail here was narrow, flanked by thick pine and birch. Visibility was limited to maybe 30 feet in any direction. If someone was following her, she wouldn't have seen them until they were close. "Or something," James added quietly. Laura shot him a look. "Let's stick to what we can prove." They continued. The terrain grew rougher, the trail climbing slightly as it wound deeper into the forest. Marcus Chen, examining the ground as they walked, pointed out something interesting. The soil composition changes here. Rockier. Harder to leave clear footprints. That's probably why those unusual prints the original search team found were so well defined earlier on the trail. The softer ground preserved them. "Until they disappeared," Devon noted. "The report said the prints just stopped." "Not stopped," Marcus corrected. "Became untraceable. There's a difference. Whatever made those impressions either moved onto harder ground or what?" Marcus hesitated. "Or changed its gait, weight distribution. Made itself harder to track." The thought hung in the air, uncomfortable. What animal consciously altered how it moved to avoid leaving tracks? They reached the clearing, the place where the dogs had stopped. 3.5 decades later, it looked unremarkable. Just another small opening in the forest canopy, carpeted with pine needles and moss. But when Laura stepped into it, she felt something shift. The temperature seemed to drop, just a degree or two. The ambient sounds of the forest, the distant bird calls and rustling branches seemed muted here. "You feel it too," Devon said. It wasn't a question. Laura nodded slowly. "What is it?" Devon walked the perimeter of the clearing, his experienced eyes scanning the trees. "Some places in the forest hold energy. My grandmother would say this is a thin place, a spot where the boundary between worlds grows weak." "I'm looking for evidence-based explanations," Laura said, but her tone was less certain than her words. "Sometimes they're the same thing," Devon replied. He stopped at one of the white pines, running his hand over the bark. "The trees here are old, really old. This pine is probably 200 years, maybe more. They've seen things we can't imagine. And sometimes they remember." James pulled out his equipment, a high-resolution camera and portable 3D scanner. "I'm going to document everything. Map the clearing, scan those tree marks, create a full digital recreation. If there's something here we're missing, maybe technology can find it." While James worked, Laura and Marcus examined the trees with the scratches. The original marks from 1989 had long since healed over, the gouges filled with new growth. But there were other marks, newer marks. Not as deep, not as dramatic, but present. "These are recent," Marcus said, pointing to a set of parallel scratches about 7 feet up a pine trunk, "within the last few years. And look at the pattern. 4 marks, evenly spaced. Same configuration as the original 1989 evidence photos." "Bears?" Laura asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus shook his head. "Black bears typically leave claw marks in groups of 5. And they don't usually mark this high unless they're stretching to full height, which leaves different patterns. These are... I don't know what these are." Devon had moved to the far edge of the clearing, crouching low, examining something on the ground. "Laura, you need to see this." She joined him. There, partially hidden under a layer of decomposing leaves, was a depression in the earth. Not a footprint exactly, more like an impression, as if something heavy had rested there. Devon carefully brushed away the debris, revealing the full shape. It was roughly oval, about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. Deep, too. Whatever made it had significant weight. And there were more of them, a trail of similar impressions leading away from the clearing toward denser forest. "How fresh are these?" Laura asked. Devon tested the soil, feeling its moisture and compaction. "Hard to say exactly. Not today, not yesterday. But not months old either. Weeks, maybe. Something was here recently. Something large and heavy." James came over with his scanner, documenting the impressions. "I'll compare these to the 1989 footprint photos, see if there are similarities." They followed the impressions as far as they could. The trail led toward a section of forest thick with deadfall and undergrowth, eventually disappearing into terrain too rough to track. But along the way, they found something else. Something that made Laura's detective instincts flare. A scrap of fabric. It was caught on a low branch, weathered and faded but still intact. Synthetic material, dark blue or black. Devon photographed it in place before Laura carefully bagged it as evidence. Modern forensics could do remarkable things with fabric. Identify the manufacturer, date the material, potentially even extract DNA if anything had been transferred to the fibers. "Could be from a hiker," James suggested. "This isn't that far off the maintained trail. People wander." "Maybe," Laura said. But something told her it was more significant than that. They continued to the location where Sarah's remains had been found in 2018. The old mine entrance was still there, partially collapsed, marked now with warning signs and orange fencing. The Forest Service had done a survey after Sarah's discovery, determining that several old mining tunnels in the area were structurally unsound and potentially dangerous. Marcus knelt at the spot where the bones had been excavated. The original forensic report indicated the remains were scattered, consistent with animal activity over many years. But the positioning was odd. Most of the bones were found within a relatively small radius, as if the body had been partially sheltered or protected from larger scavengers. "Protected how?" Laura asked. That's what bothered me when I reviewed the case files. Usually, when remains are exposed to the elements for decades, they're scattered widely. Bones are carried off by animals, moved by water, disturbed by root growth. But Sarah's skeleton was remarkably intact. Most major bones were recovered. It's almost as if something kept them together. Or someone, Laura said. Marcus met her eyes. Or someone. The possibility of human involvement had never been fully explored in 1989. The initial investigation had focused on Sarah being lost, succumbing to exposure, with her body later disturbed by wildlife. But what if someone had been in those woods with her? What if the strange footprints, the scratches, the eerie sounds Thomas Ridley described, what if all of that was misdirection? Camouflage for something far more human and far more sinister. We need to look at who else was in this area in October 1989, Laura said. Not just Thomas, everyone. Hunters, hikers, property owners, forestry workers, anyone who might have been here and seen something, or done something. Back at the Michigan State Police Post, the team spread out the evidence, both old and new. James enhanced the 1989 photographs using modern software to sharpen details that had been obscured by the limitations of 1980s photography. The results were startling. The footprint photographs, when enhanced, showed something the original investigators had noted but couldn't fully analyze. The impressions had an unusual depth pattern, deeper at the front, shallower at the heel, as if whatever made them was walking on the front of its feet, almost digitigrade, the way dogs and cats walk on their toes, rather than flat-footed like humans. Can humans walk that way? Laura asked. Marcus pulled up comparative biomechanics studies. It's possible, but difficult and unnatural for sustained periods. Ballet dancers do it, some traditional hunters use a stalking gait that's similar. But to maintain it while walking through rough forest terrain, that would require extraordinary strength and balance. James overlaid the new impressions they'd found in the clearing with the 1989 footprints. Look at this. The dimensions are similar, not identical, but close enough to suggest they might have been made by the same entity. Entity. That word again. We're entertaining the possibility that something non-human was involved, Laura said carefully. But let's not jump to conclusions. We have DNA that's anomalous but not impossible. We have footprints and impressions that are unusual but not supernatural. Everything we've found so far could have rational explanations. Could, Devon said. But do they? It was a fair question. Laura believed in Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation was usually correct. But what was the simplest explanation here? That Sarah had been followed by a person walking in a bizarre gait who left scratches high on trees and scared search dogs, or that something else entirely had been in those woods. The fabric they'd found came back from the lab with interesting results. It was nylon, likely from a windbreaker or outdoor jacket, manufactured between 2015 and 2020. So, modern, not related to Sarah's 1989 disappearance directly. But someone had been in that clearing recently, someone wearing contemporary outdoor clothing. Laura ran a query through local databases. Missing persons, suspicious activity reports, wildlife encounter complaints, anything filed in the Keweenaw Peninsula area in recent years. And there, buried in routine incident reports, she found something. 3 separate reports from hikers in 2019, 2021, and 2023. All describing similar experiences. A sense of being followed in the forest. Glimpses of something large moving between trees. One hiker described finding scratch marks on trees. Another mentioned an unusual smell, musky and organic, like wet fur and copper. The third reported hearing heavy footsteps and what he described as breathing deep and slow, like something massive was watching me. All 3 incidents occurred within a 5-mile radius of where Sarah had disappeared. It's still active, Devon said, when Laura showed him the reports. Whatever was here in 1989, it's still here. Or, James countered, people are seeing what they expect to see. Once a place gets a reputation for being strange, every snapped branch becomes evidence of monsters. Confirmation bias, Marcus agreed. The power of suggestion is profound. But Laura wasn't so sure. She'd learned to trust patterns, and there was definitely a pattern here. a consistent thread running through 35 years of incidents. Could it all be psychological? Absolutely. The human mind was incredibly susceptible to fear and imagination. Put someone alone in a dark forest, tell them stories of disappearances and strange creatures, and their brain would start filling in the gaps, creating threats from shadows. But then there was the DNA. Dr. Sharon Way, the forensic geneticist, called Laura with an update. I've been running additional analysis on that trace DNA from Sarah's clothing. I consulted with colleagues at the National Institutes of Health and the Smithsonian. The consensus is that the sample contains genetic material from multiple sources, which isn't unusual in outdoor environments. But one of the sequences is giving us trouble. What kind of trouble? It's mammalian, definitely, large mammal, but it doesn't match perfectly with any catalogued species. The closest markers are with Ursidae, the bear family, and Canidae canines. But there are divergences. Small ones but present. It's like looking at a genetic puzzle where most of the pieces fit known patterns, but a few pieces are from a different puzzle entirely. What does that mean? Dr. Way paused. Honestly, I'm not sure. It could mean contamination, though we've been extremely careful. It could mean we're looking at an individual with unusual genetic markers, a genetic anomaly, or we're looking at something that hasn't been properly documented yet. Species we don't fully understand. Hybrid populations. There's still so much biodiversity we haven't catalogued, especially in remote areas. Just because we haven't identified something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The conversation left Laura unsettled. She was a detective. She dealt in certainties, in evidence that could be presented in court, but this case kept slipping through her fingers like water, refusing to be pinned down. She decided to visit Dorothy Harmon again. Sometimes families remembered details they didn't realize were significant, small things that took on new meaning with time and context. Dorothy welcomed her into the same house Sarah had left 35 years ago. The living room was a shrine to a girl frozen in time. Photographs covered the walls. Sarah at 8 missing her front teeth. Sarah at 12, awkward and gangly. Sarah at 16, starting to grow into her features, her eyes holding that distant, thoughtful quality her friends described. "Tell me about the days before she disappeared," Laura said gently. "Was anything different? Was Sarah worried about anything? Did she mention seeing anything unusual?" Dorothy thought for a long moment, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "She was quieter than usual. I remember that. The week before, she'd come home from her walks later than normal. I asked her about it, and she said she'd just lost track of time. But there was something in her voice. Not fear exactly. More like fascination. Fascination? Sarah loved nature, loved animals. She wanted to be a forest ranger when she grew up. So when she started carrying binoculars on her walks, I thought she was just bird-watching. But one night, a few days before she disappeared, I heard her talking to Jennifer on the phone. She said something like, "I think there's something new in the forest, something I've never seen before. I need to get a better look." Laura's pulse quickened. Did she say what it was? No. Jennifer asked her. I could hear her voice through the phone. But Sarah just laughed and said she wasn't sure yet. She didn't want to say until she was certain. She was always like that, careful about jumping to conclusions. She said she wanted to sketch it first, document it properly. The journal. Sarah had been trying to document something she believed was in the forest, something she'd seen or thought she'd seen. "Do you still have her other journals?" Laura asked. "From before that week?" Dorothy's eyes brightened. "Yes, in her room. I've kept everything." She led Laura upstairs to Sarah's bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been in 1989. Posters of national parks on the walls, a shelf full of field guides and nature books, and a desk drawer filled with journals, years' worth of observations and sketches. Laura spent the next 3 hours reading through Sarah's thoughts. Most of it was typical teenage introspection mixed with genuine nature enthusiasm. Detailed descriptions of birds, careful drawings of tree bark patterns, notes about seasonal changes in the forest. But in the entries from September 1989, about a month before her disappearance, the tone began to shift. September 8th. Saw something near the creek today, too far away to make out clearly. Large, moved differently than a bear. Need to go back with binoculars. September 15th. Found tracks near the old mine. Not bear, not deer. Something else. Trying to identify. September 22nd. It's following the same route I do. I've seen it 3 times now, always at a distance. It seems curious but cautious. I want to get closer. October 1st. I think it knows I'm watching it. Today it stopped and looked directly at me. I couldn't see its face clearly through the trees, but I felt its attention. Should I be scared? I don't think so. It hasn't approached me, just observes. October 10th. Jennifer thinks I'm imagining things. Maybe I am. But I know what I've seen. Tomorrow I'm bringing my camera. I need proof. October 13th. Couldn't get a clear photo, it stays in the shadows. But I'm getting better at predicting where it goes. One more try. And then the final entry, October 14th. Written that afternoon before she left for her last walk. The entry they'd found in her journal on the boulder. I think it's watching me. Laura closed the journal, her hands shaking slightly. Sarah hadn't been running from some random threat. She'd been pursuing something. Trying to document it. Maybe trying to get closer than she should have. And whatever it was, it had been watching her back. Could curiosity have led Sarah into a danger she didn't understand? Or was she right to believe something extraordinary was in those woods? The revelation from Sarah's earlier journals changed everything. This wasn't a story of a girl lost in the wilderness. This was a story of pursuit, of fascination turned potentially fatal. Sarah had been tracking something, documenting it, trying to capture proof of its existence, and on October 14th, 1989, she'd gone into the forest one last time, determined to get close enough to finally see what had been haunting the edges of her vision for weeks. Laura assembled her team again. We're looking at this from a new angle. Sarah wasn't a victim of circumstance. She was an active participant. She went into those woods knowing something was there, wanting to find it. The question is, did she find it? And what happened when she did? Devon Martinez studied the journal entries with the careful attention of someone who understood obsession with the wild. I've seen this before. Researchers, wildlife enthusiasts, people who become fixated on documenting something rare. They take risks. They push boundaries. The desire to see, to know. It overrides survival instinct. Could she have been tracking an actual undocumented animal? Marcus Chen asked. Michigan's forests are vast. There are species that avoid human contact, individuals with unusual behaviors or appearances. Maybe Sarah stumbled onto something genuinely unknown to science. Or, James Park added, she was misinterpreting what she saw. Pattern recognition is powerful. Our brains are wired to see intentionality, to anthropomorphize. A bear with mange might look strange. A moose seen from an unusual angle. Shadows and distance can distort perception. Laura nodded. All possible, but let's work with what we know. Sarah saw something repeatedly. She documented its patterns. She believed it was aware of her. On October 14th, she went looking for it. Thomas Ridley saw her running at 5:45 p.m., apparently pursued. Then she disappeared. Her remains were found 4 miles from the trail near an old mine entrance. What fills in those gaps? The answer, it turned out, came from an unexpected source. A woman named Ellen Vasquez contacted the tip line in late March 2024, after news stories about the reopened investigation circulated through Michigan media. Ellen was 63, living in Duluth, Minnesota, but in 1989 she'd been a graduate student at Michigan Tech studying forestry. She'd been conducting field research in the Keweenaw Peninsula that October. I was doing my thesis on old-growth forest composition, Ellen explained when Laura called her. I had several study plots throughout the area. One of them was near the old miners' trail. I was there the day that girl disappeared. Laura's grip tightened on the phone. You were in the forest on October 14th, 1989? Yes. I was collecting data in the late afternoon. I remember because the light was fading faster than I'd expected, and I was rushing to finish before dark. I heard something that day, something that stuck with me all these years. What did you hear? Ellen's voice wavered slightly. Voices. One voice really calling out. Female, young. She was shouting something, but I couldn't make out the words. I was maybe a quarter-mile away, through heavy forest. Sound carries strangely in those trees. By the time I oriented myself toward where I thought the voice was coming from, it had stopped. I waited, listening, but there was nothing. Just silence. Did you report this? I didn't know I should. I assumed it was just hikers, maybe someone who'd seen a bear or gotten startled. It was only later when I heard about the missing girl that I wondered. But by then, I'd already left the area. I went back to campus. I told myself I couldn't have heard anything important. I convinced myself it was nothing. Laura felt the familiar weight of witness guilt. How many people had been in those woods that day, seen or heard fragments of Sarah's final hours, and said nothing because they didn't understand the significance? Ellen, I need you to think carefully. After the voice stopped, was there anything else? Any other sounds? Ellen was quiet for a long moment. Yes, something moving through the forest. Heavy, deliberate, not running but not walking like a person either, more like loping, long strides, breaking branches. It passed close to where I was, maybe 30 or 40 yards away. I couldn't see it through the trees, but I felt it. Does that make sense? I felt its presence. The air changed, got colder, and there was a smell. What kind of smell? Animal, but not like deer or bear. Sharper, more organic, like wet earth and blood and something else I couldn't identify. It made my stomach turn, made my instincts scream to hide. So I did. I crouched behind my equipment, stayed perfectly still until whatever it was passed by. Then I packed up and got out of there as fast as I could. Another witness describing the same phenomenon, the same smell, the same sense of wrongness, the same primal fear. Pattern recognition or genuine threat. Ellen, would you be willing to come back to Michigan? Walk us through where you were that day. If it helps find out what happened to that girl, yes, absolutely. 2 weeks later, Ellen Vasquez stood in the forest with Laura's team, retracing her movements from 35 years prior. Her study plot had been documented in her thesis, which made locating it relatively straightforward. It was roughly half a mile from where Sarah's jacket had been found, positioned between the trail and the deeper forest. I was here, Ellen said, pointing to a small clearing where she'd marked trees for her research. Some of those marked trees were still standing, now ancient giants with her old numbered tags barely visible, under decades of bark growth. My equipment was set up here, and the voice came from that direction. She pointed northeast, toward a section of forest thick with pine and rocky outcroppings. Devon and James headed in that direction, mapping coordinates, while Laura stayed with Ellen. When you heard the voice, when you heard something moving afterward, how much time passed? Ellen considered. Minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10. The voice called out several times over maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. Then silence for a few minutes. Then the sound of something moving. It came from the same direction as the voice, but angled away, like whatever it was had changed course. Marcus was examining the ground, though expecting to find evidence after 35 years was optimistic at best. If Sarah was running and something was pursuing her, and they passed through this area, we're looking at a chase scenario. Predator and prey. Or, Laura suggested, someone fleeing and someone following to help. We don't know the intent. But even as she said it, she didn't quite believe it. Everything about this case suggested Sarah had been running from something threatening, not toward safety. Devon called out from deeper in the forest, "Laura, you need to see this." They found him standing beside a massive boulder, easily 10 feet tall and twice as wide, half buried in the earth like it had been dropped by a glacier millennia ago. The rock face was covered in moss and lichen, but Devon was pointing to a section that had been rubbed clear. "Look at the height," Devon said. "Something's been rubbing against this rock regularly. You can see the pattern. Hair caught in the moss." Laura examined the fibers Devon carefully extracted. They were coarse, dark brown to black, about 3 inches long. "Could be bear," she said. "Could be," Devon agreed. Bears do rub against rocks and trees, especially during shedding season. But look at how high the rubbing goes. 7 feet, maybe higher. That's a very large bear, standing at full height, repeatedly using this same spot. James documented everything with his scanner and camera. They bagged samples of the hair for analysis. As Laura stepped back to get a wider view of the area, something caught her eye. The boulder wasn't alone. There were several large rocks in the vicinity, forming a rough semicircle. And in the center of that semicircle, the ground was compressed, packed down in a way that suggested repeated use. "It's a bedding area," Devon said, recognizing it immediately. "Animals create spaces like this. Safe spots where they rest, where they feel protected." "Protected from what?" Ellen asked nervously. "From everything. From humans, from other predators, from exposure." Devon knelt in the center of the compressed area, running his hands over the earth. "This has been used for a long time, years, maybe decades. Whatever comes here, it comes regularly." The hair samples were rushed to the lab. "Doctor." Sharon Way ran the analysis personally, her curiosity piqued by the accumulating strangeness of this case. The results came back within a week. "The hair is mammalian, consistent with Ursidae family characteristics," Dr. Way reported. "But there are anomalies in the medulla structure. The pattern is atypical. I've consulted with zoologists who specialize in bear biology. Their consensus is that these hairs are bear-like, but not from any black bear subspecies commonly found in Michigan. The closest match is to Asian moon bears or sun bears, but those species aren't native to North America. Could someone have an exotic pet?" James suggested. "An escaped captive animal?" Laura checked records. There were no permits for exotic bears in the Upper Peninsula in the 1980s. No reports of escaped zoo animals, no traveling circuses or wildlife exhibitions in the area. "What if it's a hybrid?" Marcus proposed. "Crossbreeding between species can produce individuals with unusual characteristics. If a black bear interbred with something else, a different bear species, or even a large canine. Hybridization between bears and canines isn't genetically possible," Dr. Way said. "Too divergent, but between bear species, theoretically possible, though rare and usually only in captivity." They were chasing shadows again. Every answer led to 3 more questions. Laura returned to Thomas Ridley. His health was declining, his dementia progressing, but he still had moments of clarity. She showed him photos of the bedding area, the boulder with the rubbed sections. "I know that place," Thomas said immediately. "I've seen it. Hunters talk about it. We call it the Watching Rock." "Why?" "Because if you go there, you feel watched. Every hunter who's been near that area reports the same thing, an uneasiness. Like eyes on your back. Most of us avoid it. Animals avoid it too. You don't find deer there, don't find small game, it's empty. Quiet in a way that's not natural. Thomas, you said you heard something the night Sarah disappeared. A sound like thunder but alive. Can you describe it more?" Thomas's eyes grew distant. "Low frequency. Felt it in my chest as much as heard it. Like when you stand too close to a bass speaker. Rumbling. But with texture. Almost like words, but not. Communication, but in a language that wasn't human. I've heard wolves howl, heard mountain lions scream, heard every sound these woods produce. That was nothing I knew." Laura showed him the enhanced photos of the footprints from 1989. Thomas studied them for a long time. "I saw prints like that once before," he finally said. "This was years before that girl disappeared, maybe 1975, 1976. I was hunting up near the Brockway Mountain area. Found tracks in the snow, strange ones. Everyone said it was just a bear print that had melted and refrozen, distorted by weather. But I always wondered. They looked purposeful, like whatever made them knew exactly where it was going. 49 years. If Thomas was right, something had been in these forests for at least half a century, leaving traces, creating legends, avoiding definitive documentation. But what? And was it responsible for Sarah's death? The team decided to conduct a night investigation. If something was actively using the area around Watching Rock, darkness might reveal behaviors invisible during the day. Laura was skeptical, but willing to try unconventional methods. They'd exhausted most conventional ones. On a moonless night in April 2024, Laura, Devon, Marcus, and James positioned themselves near the boulder with thermal imaging equipment, night vision cameras, and audio recording devices. They set up before sunset, settled into position, and waited. The forest at night is a different world. Sounds amplify, shadows become solid. The mind plays tricks, turning every rustling leaf into potential threat. For the first 3 hours, they documented normal wildlife activity, an owl hunting, raccoons foraging, a deer passing through at a cautious distance. Then, around 11 p.m., the forest changed. The ambient sounds stopped. The insects, the nocturnal birds, the rustling of small mammals, everything went silent. It was like someone had flipped a switch, cutting off all background noise. In the stillness, they heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crunching through underbrush, coming from the north, moving toward their position. Devon, monitoring the thermal imaging, tensed. "I'm picking up something. Large heat signature moving on 2 legs." "How large?" Laura whispered. "Bigger than human. Bigger than any bear I've seen on thermal. And it's walking upright. Consistent bipedal gait." James trained the night vision camera in the direction of the movement. Through the green-hued display they saw trees, shadows, the boulder. And then something moved between the trees. Tall, very tall, moving with a strange, fluid motion that was neither human nor entirely animal. Marcus started to stand for a better look. The movement must have been detected. Whatever was out there stopped, complete stillness. Then, cutting through the silence, a sound, low, rumbling, resonant enough that they felt it vibrate in their chests. Not quite a growl, not quite a vocalization, something between. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, then cut off. Then the smell hit them, organic, musky, sharp, wet fur and copper and decay. Devon's hand found Laura's arm, gripping tight. "Don't move," he breathed. "Don't make a sound." They froze. 4 trained professionals, armed, equipped with technology, reduced to prey instinct. For what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, they waited. The thermal imaging showed the heat signature standing motionless about 40 yards away, watching them, assessing. Then it turned. They heard the movement, heavy footfalls, branches breaking. The signature moved away, heading deeper into the forest, at a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. Within 30 seconds, it was gone. The forest sounds gradually returned, insects and night birds cautiously resuming their activities. Nobody spoke for several minutes. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. What did we just experience?" James was reviewing the footage, his hands shaking slightly. The night vision caught something. Not clear, too much tree cover, but there's definitely a shape. Bipedal, 7 feet tall, maybe more, moving away. "The thermal imaging?" Laura asked. Devon pulled up the data. "Recorded. Heat signature consistent with a large mammal, but the size and the bipedal locomotion, I don't have an explanation." They packed up quickly, professional composure warring with primal urgency to leave. Back at the police station, they reviewed everything multiple times. The audio had captured the sound, that deep rumbling. Analysis showed it was in the infrasonic range, below 20 hertz, the threshold of normal human hearing. They'd felt it more than heard it. "Elephants use infrasound for long-distance communication," Marcus noted. "Some big cats, but the pattern here is different, more complex." The footage was frustratingly inconclusive. Shapes between trees, movement, size comparison suggested something large but no clear image. Enough to confirm they'd encountered something, not enough to definitively identify what. Laura wrote her report carefully. Professional, evidence-based. She described what they'd documented without speculation. But privately, she knew they'd crossed a threshold. They'd experienced what Sarah Harmon had experienced, the presence, the awareness, the thing in the woods that shouldn't exist but did. The fabric sample they'd found earlier came back with one more piece of information, traced DNA on the fibers, human DNA. The lab ran it through CODIS, the FBI's criminal database. They got a hit. The DNA belonged to a man named Raymond Voss, 58 years old, with a criminal record for poaching and illegal hunting. He'd been arrested in 2016 for killing protected species, in a Wisconsin state forest. And according to his last known address, he'd been living in Michigan's Upper Peninsula since 2020. Laura and 2 state troopers went to Raymond's address, a run-down cabin 15 miles from Copper Ridge. Raymond met them at the door, suspicious and defensive, but he agreed to talk. "I know these woods," Raymond said, sitting on his porch with a cigarette. "Been hunting them for 40 years. I know things people don't want to know." "Like what?" Laura asked. Raymond smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Like what lives here? What's always lived here? The thing people see but don't talk about because talking about it makes you sound crazy. Have you seen it?" "Multiple times, mostly at distance. Once up close 3 years ago. I was tracking an elk, got careless, wandered into territory I should have avoided. It came out of nowhere, stood 20 feet from me, looked right at me with eyes that had intelligence. Not animal intelligence, something more. It could have killed me easy, but it just studied me. Then made this sound, this rumbling that felt like it was coming from inside my own chest. Warning. Then it turned and walked away. Can you describe it?" Raymond took a long drag on his cigarette. 8 feet tall, maybe more, broad, covered in dark hair, brown or black, arms longer than human proportions. Face. I couldn't see clearly. It was dusk, but the shape was wrong for a bear. Too flat, too forward. It walked on 2 legs like it was natural, not like a bear rearing up. It was comfortable that way. Why didn't you report this? To who? Who'd believe me? I'm a convicted poacher. I say I saw Bigfoot, everyone laughs. But I know what I saw, and I know I'm not the only one. There's a whole network of us, hunters and trackers, who've encountered it. We don't talk publicly, but we know. Laura felt pieces clicking into place. Raymond, were you near the old miners' trail recently? In the last few months? Raymond hesitated. Maybe. We found fabric with your DNA on it, near where a girl disappeared in 1989, Sarah Harmon. Raymond's face changed. I heard about her. The case they reopened. I was in those woods recently, yeah. I was tracking it, trying to get evidence. Not to hurt it, to prove it exists. I found signs, tracks, marks on trees. I was getting close, I thought. Then I found something else. What? Bones. Old bones. Human bones, I think, though I'm no expert. Scattered in a ravine about a mile from that old mine. I marked the location on my GPS but didn't tell anyone, because I didn't want to explain why I was there. Laura's pulse quickened. Show us. The next day, Raymond led them to a ravine they'd somehow missed in previous searches. Hidden behind a tangle of fallen trees and thick undergrowth, accessible only by a narrow game trail. There, scattered among the rocks and roots, they found skeletal remains. Not Sarah's. These bones had been there even longer, decades more. Forensic analysis would later determine they were from a male, approximately 45 years old, deceased for 50 to 60 years. Identity would eventually be established through dental records. Michael Brennan, a mining engineer who disappeared in 1967 while surveying old copper mines. 2 disappearances, Sarah in 1989, Michael in 1967, same area, same circumstances, same mysterious presence in the forest. The discovery of Michael Brennan's remains opened a door to the past that nobody had expected. Laura immediately requested a full record search for disappearances in the Keweenaw Peninsula area, going back as far as documentation existed. What she found was chilling in its consistency. 1967, Michael Brennan, mining engineer, age 45. 1982, Lisa Chen, wildlife photographer, age 29. 1989, Sarah Lynn Harmon, student, age 17. 1995, David Corhonen, park maintenance worker, age 52. 2003, Amanda Torres, no relation to the current police chief, hiking enthusiast, age 34. 5 confirmed disappearances over nearly 40 years, all within a 10-mile radius of the old miners' trail. Lisa Chen's remains had been found in 1984, attributed to a fall from a cliff. David Corhonen's body was recovered in 1996, cause of death listed as exposure. Amanda Torres was never found. The pattern was undeniable. Something about this area was dangerous. Whether that danger was environmental, human, or something else entirely remained the question that haunted Laura's investigation. But then came the breakthrough that would change everything. Dr. Sharon Way had been working tirelessly on the DNA evidence, consulting with geneticists across the country, running samples through every available database, and using cutting-edge analysis techniques that hadn't existed even 5 years earlier. In May 2024, she called Laura with results that defied simple explanation. "I've been able to separate and identify multiple DNA sources from Sarah's clothing," Dr. E. White explained, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "We have Sarah's DNA, obviously. We have environmental contamination from various animals and plant materials, but we also have 2 distinct unknown DNA signatures that don't match any catalogued species." "2?" Laura asked. "Yes. One is the sample we've been analyzing all along, the one with bear-like and canine-like markers, but doesn't fit perfectly with either. But the second signature is what's really interesting. It's human, or rather it's hominin." Laura felt her world tilt. "Hominin? Like ancient human?" "Exactly like that. The genetic markers show similarities to Homo sapiens, but with divergences that suggest either extreme genetic drift or—" Dr. Way paused, choosing her words carefully. "Or a population that's been isolated for a very long time, evolving separately from modern humans." "That's impossible." "I would have said so too, but the data doesn't lie. I've had 3 independent labs verify this. The DNA is real. The question is, what does it mean?" Laura sat in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. Could there be an isolated population of archaic humans living in North America's forests? The scientific establishment had long dismissed such possibilities. Neanderthals died out 40,000 years ago. Denisovans disappeared around the same time. Modern humans were the only remaining hominin species on Earth. Or so everyone believed. "There's one more thing," Dr. Way continued. "I found the same DNA signature in the hair samples from the boulder, and when I went back and tested the old evidence from 1989, the samples that were too degraded to analyze with older technology, I found it there too. Whatever left its DNA on Sarah's clothing in 1989 is the same thing that's been using that bedding area. It's the same thing you encountered in the forest last month. You're telling me there's a population of unknown hominins living in Michigan? I'm telling you the DNA evidence suggests something is out there that science hasn't properly documented, whether it's a remnant population, an undiscovered species, or something else entirely, I can't say. But it's real, it's biological, and it's been in those forests for at least as long as we've been looking." Laura shared this information with her team in a closed meeting. The reactions ranged from skepticism to wonder to outright disbelief. "Bigfoot," James said flatly. "We're talking about Bigfoot." "We're talking about evidence," Laura corrected. "Evidence that suggests something unknown to mainstream science exists in these forests. Whether that aligns with cryptozoological legends or represents something entirely different is speculation." Marcus was more intrigued than skeptical. "There are precedents. Mountain gorillas weren't scientifically documented until 1902, despite local populations knowing about them for centuries. The saola, a large mammal in Vietnam, wasn't discovered until 1992. Just because something hasn't been officially catalogued doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But a hominin," James countered, "an undocumented ape or deer is one thing. An unknown human relative is something else entirely." "The DNA doesn't care about our beliefs," Devon said quietly. "It says what it says." The question remained, what did this mean for Sarah's case? They had evidence that something biologically real had been in contact with Sarah. They had testimony from multiple sources describing encounters with something large, bipedal and intelligent. They had Sarah's own journal entries documenting her tracking of an unknown creature. And they had her remains, found miles from where she'd last been seen, showing skeletal trauma consistent with a fall. A fall. That detail had been noted in the original forensic report, but not fully explored. Dr. Marcus Chen requested to re-examine Sarah's bones, specifically looking at the fracture patterns with fresh eyes and modern techniques. What he found told a story. Sarah suffered multiple fractures consistent with falling from a significant height, Marcus explained, displaying 3D reconstructions of her skeleton. Left leg fractured in 2 places, right arm, multiple ribs, pelvic fracture. The pattern suggests she fell at least 20 to 30 feet, landing on her left side. Where could she have fallen from? Laura asked. That's what bothered me about the original analysis. Her remains were found near the mine entrance, but there's no significant elevation change in that immediate area. No cliffs, no ledges high enough to cause this injury pattern. So I started looking at the geography differently. What if she didn't fall where she was found? What if she fell somewhere else and was moved? The team returned to the forest, this time looking for elevated terrain. Devon, with his intimate knowledge of the area, led them to a section about a mile from where Sarah's remains had been discovered. Here the landscape changed dramatically. Rocky outcroppings rose above the forest floor, creating natural ledges and drop-offs. Some of these drops were 30 feet or more, concealed by vegetation and treacherous in low light. If Sarah was running, disoriented, scared, Devon said, standing at the edge of one such drop-off, she might not have seen this until it was too late, especially at dusk. They searched the area thoroughly, and there at the base of a particularly steep rock face, they found something that had gone unnoticed for 35 years. A small depression in the earth, now filled with decades of leaf litter and growth. But when they carefully excavated, they found fragments, pieces of degraded fabric, a button that matched the description of Sarah's flannel shirt, and bone fragments that Dr. Chen confirmed were consistent with human remains. This is where she fell, Marcus said with certainty. This is the primary death scene. But that raised another question. How had her remains ended up a mile away at the mine entrance? The answer, when it came, was as unsettling as the rest of the case. Raymond Voss, when shown photos of the cliff site and the mine location, provided an explanation that made terrible sense. Things in these forests bury their dead. I've seen it. Not just covering them with leaves, actually moving bodies, placing them in sheltered locations. I found a dead deer once, carefully positioned in a hollow log covered with branches. No predator does that. Predators scatter. But something in these woods has different behaviors, more deliberate. You're saying something moved Sarah's body? Laura asked. I'm saying it's possible. If she fell, if she died there and something found her, maybe it moved her somewhere it considered safer, more protected. The old mines, they're like caves, sheltered, dark. A place where remains would be preserved. It was a hypothesis that defied conventional understanding of animal behavior. But then again, everything about this case defied convention. Laura commissioned one final analysis. She wanted to know definitively how Sarah had died. The skeletal trauma showed she'd fallen, but had she been alive when she fell? Or had something happened before that? Advanced analysis of the bone fractures provided an answer. The patterns were consistent with Sarah being alive at the time of the fall. The way the bones had broken, the presence of certain types of fractures, all indicated her heart had been beating, her body under physiological stress when the trauma occurred. She had fallen while trying to escape something, and the fall had killed her, likely within minutes. Sarah Lynn Harmon had died running from something in the woods. Whether that something was a threat or just her fear of a threat, they would never know with certainty. But she had died terrified, alone, in the dark forest she'd loved. The hardest part of Laura's job was delivering this news to Dorothy Harmon. On a quiet morning in June 2024, Laura sat in the same living room where this investigation had begun, across from a mother who'd waited 35 years for answers. Sarah was tracking something, Laura explained gently. Something she believed was in the forest. Her journals show she'd been observing it for weeks. On October 14th, she went looking for it. We believe she found it, or it found her. Something scared her badly enough that she ran. In the darkness, in unfamiliar terrain, she didn't see a drop-off. She fell, the injuries were severe, she wouldn't have suffered long. Dorothy's hands shook as she held a photograph of her daughter. Was it an animal? A bear? What was she running from? Laura chose her words carefully. We found DNA evidence that suggests she had contact with something that hasn't been definitively identified by science. Whether it was actually dangerous, Or whether Sarah just perceived it as dangerous, we can't say. But she wasn't alone in those woods. Something was there with her. "Will you find it?" Dorothy asked. "Will you find what killed my daughter?" "Sarah's death was an accident," Laura said. "A tragic accident caused by fear and darkness and terrible luck. Whatever was in those woods, we have no evidence it actively harmed her. But yes, we're continuing to investigate. We want to know what's out there." Dorothy was silent for a long time, tears streaming down her weathered face. Finally, she spoke. "Sarah loved mysteries, loved discovering things. Part of me is almost glad she died chasing something unknown, rather than from something mundane. She would have wanted to see it, whatever it was, to understand it." It was a bittersweet truth. Sarah had died pursuing the kind of discovery that captivated her imagination. In another timeline, in different circumstances, maybe she would have been the one to document an unknown species, to bring evidence of something extraordinary to the world. Instead, she'd become part of the mystery herself. The case was officially closed in July 2024. Sarah Lynn Harmon's death was ruled accidental, caused by a fall while fleeing from an unknown stimulus in the forest. The DNA evidence was filed but not publicized widely. Laura knew that releasing information about potentially undocumented hominins would trigger a media circus, attract cryptozoology enthusiasts, and possibly endanger whatever was living in those forests. "If it's real," Laura told her team in their final meeting, "if there is a population of unknown hominins in these forests, they've survived this long by staying hidden, by avoiding humans. The last thing we want is to start an invasive search that could harm them or their habitat." "So we just leave it?" James asked. "We document what we found, we file the reports, we let the scientific community decide how to proceed, but we don't sensationalize." Sarah deserves better than to have her death turned into a sideshow. Devon Martinez returned to the forest one last time, leaving an offering at the base of Watching Rock. Tobacco, as was his tradition, and a photograph of Sarah. "If you're listening," he said to the trees, to whatever might be out there, "she didn't mean you harm, she was just curious. She just wanted to see you. Let her rest." The forest offered no response, but Devon felt in that moment a sense of acknowledgement. The air shifted. The silence held weight. Then a bird called and the moment passed. In the months that followed, reports of unusual activity in the Quinault Peninsula forests decreased noticeably. Hikers still occasionally reported feeling watched, but the more dramatic encounters seemed to fade. Whether whatever lived there had learned to be more cautious, or whether increased human attention had driven it deeper into wilderness, nobody could say. Raymond Voss, the poacher who'd helped crack the case, was granted immunity from prosecution for his illegal hunting in exchange for his cooperation. He became, unofficially, a liaison between law enforcement and the small community of hunters and trackers who'd had encounters over the years. "If it's out there," Raymond told Laura, "it deserves to live without harassment. It was here first. We're the intruders." The DNA samples remained in Dr. Sharon Wei's lab, available for future analysis as genetic technology continued to advance. She published a paper, carefully worded, describing anomalous genetic sequences recovered from a wilderness death investigation, without mentioning cryptozoology or making sensational claims. The paper attracted interest from evolutionary biologists and geneticists, sparking quiet discussions about the possibility of undocumented hominin populations. But the mainstream scientific community remained skeptical, as it should be. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and while the DNA was intriguing, it wasn't definitive proof of anything beyond something we don't fully understand yet. Dorothy Harmon held a memorial service for Sarah in August 2024, finally able to properly mourn now that she knew what had happened. Jennifer Kowalski flew in from California, where she'd built a life as an environmental lawyer. She placed a bouquet of wildflowers on Sarah's grave and whispered, "You found your mystery. I hope it was worth it." The case left marks on everyone who touched it. Laura Fenimore found herself questioning assumptions she'd held her entire career. The world was larger, stranger, more full of possibilities than she'd allowed herself to believe. She continued working cold cases, but with a different perspective now. Some mysteries had answers that defied neat categorization. Marcus Chen went on to become one of the leading forensic anthropologists in the country, but he never forgot the case that taught him humility in the face of the unknown. James Park developed new analytical techniques based on what he'd learned, methods for extracting information from degraded evidence that would solve dozens of other cold cases. Devon Martinez continued guiding people through the forests, but with renewed respect for the boundaries between human world and wild. "There are things in these woods older than our understanding," he'd tell clients. "Our job is to walk carefully, observe respectfully, and know when not to go further." As for what really lives in the forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, that remains an open question. The DNA evidence suggests something biological, something real, something that shares a distant evolutionary connection with humanity, but has diverged along its own path. Whether it's a remnant population of an archaic hominin species, an unknown primate, or something else entirely, science has not yet determined. What is certain is that Sarah Lynn Harmon saw something in those woods, something that fascinated her enough to risk everything for a closer look, something that continues to leave traces for those who know how to look, something that walks upright through the ancient forests, aware and watchful, maintaining the boundary between the known and the unknown. The mystery isn't fully solved. Perhaps it never will be. Perhaps some questions aren't meant to have definitive answers. Perhaps the wonder lies not in the knowing, but in the possibility that there are still things in this world that science hasn't catalogued, things that exist in the margins of understanding, things that remind us how much we have yet to discover. Sarah Lynn Harmon spent her final hours pursuing that sense of wonder. In the end, maybe that's not the worst way to go, chasing something extraordinary, reaching for answers that dance just beyond our grasp, reminded of how vast and strange and magnificent the world truly is. The forest keeps its secrets, but it also keeps the memory of a 17-year-old girl who wasn't afraid to look into the darkness and ask, "What are you?" 35 years later, we have fragments of an answer. DNA that doesn't quite fit. Footprints that defy explanation. Testimony from dozens of witnesses describing something that shouldn't exist but does. And the knowledge that in the wild places of this world, in the deep forests where humans rarely go, there are still mysteries waiting. Sarah found her mystery. It cost her everything. But in the process, she left behind evidence that might one day rewrite our understanding of what shares this planet with us. Her journals, her DNA samples, her final journal entry, "I think it's watching me." All of it contributes to a larger question that humanity is only beginning to ask seriously. Are we alone in these forests? Or is there something else, something ancient and intelligent and determined to remain hidden, watching us from the shadows as we stumble through their domain? The DNA breakthrough didn't solve the mystery in the way Dorothy Harmon hoped. It didn't provide closure in the neat, tidy way that families of the missing desperately need, but it provided something perhaps more important: validation. Validation that Sarah wasn't imagining things, that her curiosity wasn't misplaced, that there truly was something extraordinary in those woods, something worth documenting, something worth the risk she took. On clear nights in Copper Ridge, Michigan, people still look toward the forest and wonder. The hikers who feel eyes on their backs. The hunters who find tracks that don't match any known animal. The children who hear stories of something in the woods and feel that primal thrill of fear and fascination mixed together. They wonder if it's still out there, still watching, still maintaining its vigil at the edge of human understanding. The evidence suggests it is. And somewhere in those ancient forests, perhaps, something wonders about us too. Wonders about the curious young woman who tried so hard to see it. Wonders about the investigators who came looking for answers. Wonders about the strange, loud, numerous creatures called humans who build their houses at the edge of the wilderness and occasionally venture too far into the deep. Two species, separated by biology and understanding, sharing the same landscape. One documented by science, the other existing in the spaces between proven and impossible. Sarah Lynn Harmon bridged that space, however briefly. And in doing so, she left us with a gift, the knowledge that the world is still capable of surprising us, that there are still frontiers of discovery, that the map still has blank spaces marked, "Here be mysteries." The case is closed, but the questions remain open, just as Sarah would have wanted.